Hey guys, first Drew Guardsman here, and I want to talk about the current state of Space Marine 2 in 2026. This game just had one of its biggest updates with the launch of Tech Marine in patch 12, and I think it's a great time to talk about how far Space Marine 2 has come since launch, and why it's really become one of the best horde shooters on the market. It's been a little over a year and a half since Space Marine 2 initially launched in September of 2024, and as a huge fan of both Warhammer 40k and PvE co-op horde shooters, I have been playing this thing religiously since launch, to the point I have actually put almost 4,000 hours into the game by now, so I have quite a few thoughts on this one to say the least. Now, this game had a very successful initial launch and reception, selling over 2 million copies in its first 24 hours, and 4.5 million by the end of the first month, which drastically exceeded the expectations of Saber Interactive. The campaign featuring Lieutenant Titus was a massive hit, and I really think the biggest success of this game at launch was more so for the entire franchise of Warhammer 40k rather than one successful video game. Space Marine 2 was a ton of people's first introduction to the setting, the Imperium of Mankind, and more importantly, Space Marines, which are by far the most popular faction in 40k way before this game even came out. But now that's even more intense, as Titus has been effectively made the mascot of Warhammer's flagship Space Marine chapter, the Ultramarines. The campaign really was the perfect representation of what most people would expect from a 40k story revolving around Space Marines: larger than life set pieces, sections where you're holding the line against impossible odds. I mean, some of the most iconic artwork for Ultramarines and 40k in general is one guy holding a banner with 50 other dudes shooting around him, and that is directly in this game pretty much. And on top of the game itself, Titus received not only his own animation for the Amazon Prime Secret Level series, but also a fully animated cinematic trailer for the release of his new captain model and his promotion to captain after Acheron's death in a Warhammer community post, on top of an entire campaign box set called 500 Worlds featuring none other than Titus and Gadriel from the game, with Sergeant Matoris from the Secret Level series, which are probably going to be the 3 playable characters for campaign Space Marine 3 that was also announced mere months after the launch of Space Marine 2. So it is safe to say that Space Marine 2 severely overperformed, and many things at Saber and Games Workshop appear to have been shifted as a result of this game's success. But how is the actual game? Well, Space Marine 2 at launch beyond the campaign was, in my opinion, a pretty mediocre game at best compared to where it is now. Once you were done with the campaign, the main PvE mode, Operations, was incredibly underbaked at launch. There were only 6 missions to play, and the balance across classes and weapons was abysmal. Melee weapons felt damn near unusable, as only one of the 3 weapon defense types in the game was even particularly decent. Ranged weapons reigned supreme for both you, the player, and the enemies, as the Chaos faction was actually able to spawn like 10 snipers against you at once back at launch, and thankfully these days, many of these things are much improved. First of all, the melee weapons across the board are significantly more useful now than they were previously, and weapon types like block have entirely new mechanics added to them compared to their original launch state, and other weapons have received major flat stat buffs that have made them far better. I really can't express enough just how much better the gameplay loop of the game is in 2026 compared to 2024. It is to the point that I don't even know how I enjoyed playing the game's operations at all a year and a half ago. We've also had the addition of 6 new operations to the game since launch, with a total of 12 versus the 6 we previously had, and multiple new modes added as well, with things like stratagems that add fun or difficult modifiers to your operations game, and even a wave-based siege mode. Year 2 was when Saber seriously locked in for this game. The new roadmap added far more substantial content than what we got in Year 1. It really seems that most of the content in Year 1 was just stuff they had already partially completed. And Year 2 is a major push from Saber's parent company, and probably Games Workshop as well, to capitalize on the success of the game. Where I think the game has improved the most, however, is in its customization for both your class builds and characters. Armor customization especially has become far more substantial than it was in Year 1. The paid DLC champion skins were previously uncustomizable. You would just select them as an outfit option, and that was it. You could not swap out any of the armor pieces between classes, but in September of last year, they actually unlocked these as individual customization options in a huge overhaul of the entire system, and this was probably the single biggest boon to player customization in this game, because to say it feels dramatically less limited would be an understatement, and they have been progressively adding extra options every patch since the initial overhaul. This means that the $8 champion skins that were previously class locked are actually more fairly priced now than they were in year 1 as well. And as far as the class gameplay balance is concerned, every single class is in a great spot at the moment for the majority of the content in the game. Even classes like Heavy and Vanguard that do have more limited options in their effective perk loadouts than some of the other classes are still leagues better than they were initially at launch. Saber's done a really good job reworking some of the weaker perks in the game. Some of them do still suck, and some trees are still in need of a serious overhaul, but both weapon and class skill trees are in a much better spot now, and there are also now entirely new prestige ranks that were added in April of 2024, where you effectively re-level your class slightly faster each time, 4 times over, for access to prestige perks that give you even more power. This brings me to what is currently my biggest gripe of the game, at least for new players, which is the somewhat excessive grind to unlock perks and equipment. It's not the worst grind I've ever seen in a game, but that being said, it will take a couple hundred hours of gameplay to unlock everything. And whether or not you consider unlocking weapons and perks content, that's really up to the individual, but personally, I think it's a bit much in this game at the moment. But luckily, there is a progression update on the way, so maybe by the time you're watching this, that is already out, and the entire leveling process is significantly smoother. Space Marine 2 will be getting major updates throughout 2026, and even though there is no roadmap for the latter half of this year, Saber and Focus have made many comments highly indicating a year 3 plan of some sort. The addition of the heroic weapons, which are effectively relic tier weapons with bonus effects, pretty much guaranteed some kind of content plan beyond the current year 2 roadmap, mainly because we are supposed to get 2 heroic variants for every single weapon in the game, for both melee and ranged, and there is barely enough time for every weapon getting 1 heroic variant with the remaining roadmap this year. Now, Space Marine 2 does have a PvP mode as well called Eternal War. This does still receive some updates, but it does receive significantly less content in the PvE mode in the game. There is still a dedicated player base for the PvP, however, and most of them are pretty damn good at the game at this point in its life cycle, so you will probably get mopped if you play it now. I, for one, definitely would if I played PvP in this game more, but if playing as a Heretic Astartes in a player versus player scenario sounds like something you're interested in and getting packed up by pros while learning the game doesn't bother you, then PvP is definitely an option. There are also extra cosmetic unlocks independent of purchase DLC that you can unlock through the post-launch ordeal system. This is basically the penance system from Darktide, where you just complete challenges in-game for both PvP and PvE to unlock the ordeal's currency, which you can use to buy some free requisition points and unique cosmetics. There really aren't all that many cosmetic unlocks here, but it is neat to have, and it does give you something else to work towards while you are grinding out your weapon levels and purchasing class perks. And speaking of cosmetics, this is one of the things that seriously upholds the player base, which is customizing your Marine with various chapter markings and armor pieces, which is an enormous part of this game's success. So much so that Saber Interactive has based their entire business model to fund new updates in this game purely off of cosmetic DLC packs. There is quite literally not a single piece of gameplay content to be found in a purchasable expansion. The DLCs in this game are 100% cosmetic items, and I can't really think of many other games that do this. Even games like Darktide that do have an in-game store for purchase cosmetics will release their new classes such as the Arbites and Hive Scum as a paid expansion. In the case of Space Marine 2, however, we just got a brand new class of the Tech Marine in late February for free, and he has just as much depth, if not more, than the base game classes do. The success of the DLC cosmetic packs in this game is not all that surprising, considering unlike pretty much every other horde shooter on the market, Space Marine 2 feels directly locked into the broader Warhammer community. It is practically impossible to play this game and interact with its community members without engaging in conversation of some kind relating to the wider 40k universe, and I think that is where this game's charm really comes from. Even though the DLCs occasionally have some lackluster armor pieces or things like the DLC voice pack being overpriced, this is still a premier Space Marine experience. There really is no other game like it when it comes to Games Workshop's flagship faction. It really does function as a hub for those who really love the lore of the series and people who just want a fun action game. And the fact that DLC cosmetics have been selling so well because of that 40k audience is really the biggest thing keeping this game alive. Because quite simply, I don't think this game would be remotely as popular as it is currently if it was not part of the wider 40k universe, and I don't really think it's a bad thing either. That is what is allowing us to have a somewhat steady flow of post-launch free updates, with the developers laying out a roadmap with multiple patches extending through 2026 and presumably a 2027 roadmap to be announced later this year, bringing new PvE missions, PvP arenas, weapons, and gameplay systems. These updates are important because the core modes, Operations, PvP, Eternal War, and Siege, they benefit heavily from new maps and enemy encounters. By continuing to expand those modes, the game has somewhat avoided a full-on content drought, though it has has come pretty close before. My biggest gripe with the game is mainly some questionable balance decisions and bug fixes that seem to take ages to fix. Some perk trees are still in a desperate need of an overhaul, and a lot of perks have just been blatantly trashed since the launch of the game and have hardly been touched at all for over a year and a half now. But hopefully towards the end of summer we will get a major balance patch addressing some of these complaints, since they did something similar last year with patch 9. But at the end of the day, Space Marine 2 in 2026 feels like a game that found its footing after launch. It might not be the biggest shooter on the market, but has a really dedicated community and a clear identity. So if you like co-op action, huge enemy hordes, and the brutal style of the Warhammer universe, the game still delivers exactly what it promised, being a massive armored super soldier cutting through armies of Xenos and heretics. And while it is definitely not perfect, it has only gotten better over time, and I expect I'll be playing it for years to come until we get Space Marine 3, which will hopefully take notes from this game's post-launch content cycle and balance to have a drastically better launch than Space Marine 2 did. So if you like content like this, subscribe for more, and if you want to come ask me questions about the game or just come hang out, you can find me here on YouTube or on Twitch with a link in the video description alongside a link to my community Discord. And as always, thank you for watching, take it easy, bye.